Welcome to our session, the READ Framework for Bilingual Family School Partnerships. Today, we're going to be talking with you about how well we are communicating, advocating, and relationship building with bilingual families. My name is Dr. Suzanne Abdelrahim, and I am one of the researchers on this project.
And I'm Leslie Baines, and I'm another researcher on this project at UC Davis.
And I'm Soha Mahmoud-Tabana, joining them also as a researcher on this project.
Just wanted to let you know that this work is funded by a National Professional Development Grant from the Office of English of Language Acquisition at the U.S. Department of Education. Our agenda for today, we're going to start with reflecting on our current practice, taking a look at our framework, specifically looking at the research that we have gathered. We're going to share some tools with you that we have created, and we're going to conclude by inviting you to apply some new knowledge. Before we get started today, we want to share with you a Padlet link where you can find resources that we're going to be sharing during the session today. So you can either hold up your phone and use the QR code or the tiny URL at the bottom there. On that Padlet, there is also a Google form, which I'll talk about at the very end again. On that Google form, if you fill out your name and your email, we'll be able to contact you later with more tools as we create more and as we update our current tools as well. So make sure to fill out that Google form before the end of the session. All right, let's begin by thinking about our current practices with bilingual families. So we want you to think about how well are we communicating with our bilingual families, and how do you know? How do we engage bilingual families as key decision makers? What else could we try? And what strategies do we use to build trust with our bilingual families? So we invite you to reflect on those questions for a few moments here. You can pause this video as you reflect. We've grouped these reflection questions into 3 different categories: communication, advocacy, and relationships. And as you'll see, these are the components of the READ framework for bilingual family school partnerships. The READ framework for bilingual family school partnerships conveys a dynamic approach to family engagement that promotes reciprocal communication, empowering advocacy efforts, and trusting relationships in service of student learning. We're going to take just a moment here and watch an introductory video to further explain our framework.
Welcome to the READ framework for bilingual family school partnerships. This framework consists of 3 key components: communication, advocacy, and relationships that serve to foster student learning. We situate our framework within 2 theories of family engagement: Epstein's theory of overlapping spheres of influence and Yasso's community cultural wealth model. When schools connect home languages to language and learning at school, the result is increased student achievement. Our dynamic approach promotes reciprocal communication, empowers advocacy efforts and trusting relationships, focuses on student learning, and values students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds. There are 3 key components: communication, advocacy, and relationships, working together with the ultimate goal of engagement in student learning. Our framework also incorporates TransLanguaging practices, which recognizes that emergent bilinguals can use their home language to help draw from all of their linguistic resources, promoting a deeper understanding of content. We think of communication as sharing and exchanging information using culturally sensitive TransLanguaging practices. Advocacy is including families as key decision makers in shaping activities and programs to value diverse perspectives. We think about relationship building as building mutual trust between bilingual students, educators, and families. At the center of our framework, we offer a bridge from theory to practice for engaging emergent bilingual families using a TransLanguaging approach to increase student learning. Research shows that engaging families in the education of their children results in positive academic outcomes for students in general and for bilingual students in particular. Our team here at READ set out to design a framework and corresponding resources to support educators and administrators in fostering and fortifying family engagement efforts, with a specific focus on families of emergent bilingual students.
Our framework values students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds and their ways of knowing and communicating as important contributions to classroom and resources for learning.
TransLanguaging is a really important part of our framework. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what TransLanguaging is. So you'll actually see the word languaging, and that's a term coined by Swain. And so it actually, it should help us think about what we do when we are using language. We are languaging. So we are negotiating meaning. So we should be thinking about that two-way communication of how are we understanding each other? How are we creating meaningful communication? So when we translanguage, we're going across languages. And this is a practice that helps students and families feel that their home language and culture are valued. So we're helping create strong, positive bilingual identities in our students by making sure their families' languages are represented in our classrooms and in the ways that we communicate with families. So we're bringing the languages in. So instead of maybe older models where we would think about translation, where maybe we would translate documents to send home to parents, that's kind of a one-way communication. We're really talking about two-way communication using all of the languages that we have access to. Okay, so beyond the one-way translation. And it refers to the use of a person's entire language repertoire to communicate. So we're going in between languages, maybe we're mixing languages, so we're using really all of our resources to communicate. So here's a little bit more information about what it is and how it can look when we're using it with our families. So it's using multiple languages to process content. So think about students and families using all of their languages to really make sense of academic content and texts and important ideas in your class. And it's communicating. So using multiple languages, maybe in the same sentence, maybe across the communication in a paragraph to communicate our ideas more fully. And using words, phrases, or sentences from one language, maybe to communicate in another. So why would we do this? We do this to support students in learning content and learning in both languages. So we know from research that the more students can make connections between their two languages, they're learning more in their home language. They're also learning more in English because they're connecting those words and ideas across their languages. So it'll increase student comprehension, and it empowers students and their families to participate, to be more actively engaged with the school in your classroom and having their knowledge and language really represented as something valuable and important that we can build on. And as we do that, we're helping build those strong, positive bilingual identities for our students and their families. So how do we do this? These are just a few ideas. There are lots of ways we can do this. We can allow students to read or view things in their home language as a resource for learning. And we'll show you a couple ways to do this in a minute. We can encourage students to collaborate using their home languages. We can display home languages alongside English so that they're visible in our physical classrooms, on our word walls, in our Zoom classrooms as well. And we can ask families to read or tell stories in their home language or using a mix of languages as well. So here's an example. And the big idea with translanguaging is that in our class, we use all of our languages to answer big questions so that we can all learn even more. So this shows a narrative of the Little Red Hen, and it's in 4 languages. So a teacher and students and families can collaborate to put something like this together. So we can look across languages and learn so much more by connecting the languages, going deeper with the story, getting a better idea of what it means, what are the similarities across languages, what are the differences, how are things worded differently or structured differently, what does that look like when we use Chinese, what does that look like, right, when we use different languages. We can do this beyond just language arts. We can also do it with math. We could create math explanations that we're putting on the wall. So we're freezing the language that usually is just done orally, and we're displaying it across languages so that students really can connect their languages and learn even more and really start to talk about what makes a good math explanation. And we can bring families into that as well. And so think about how could we create cooperative paragraphs with our families or oral paragraphs with our families that are using really taking advantage, leveraging their language as a resource for learning. Here's an example of a multilingual word wall. We could offer this to families and to students as they're discussing stories in English or in the home language, or better yet, English and the home language side by side. So what does the research say about communication? Epstein talks about different purposes for communication. For teachers, regular communication increases their ability to understand family views on student learning. So really getting at what do our families want for their students? All families want their students to succeed. What does that look like? What does that mean to them? And how do we use that? How do we build on that? And for families, communication with the school improves their understanding of educational programs and policies and helps them monitor their child's progress. So helping bring them in, helping them understand what their students are doing, what they're learning about, and what parents have to offer and learn with the children, and as teachers to also be learning with the students and with the families. And for students, communication with the teachers and their caregivers increases awareness of their own progress and the steps that they need to take to improve academic achievement. Okay, so when we think about what we're translating for our families and how we're bringing in multiple languages, it's really important first to understand the state and district regulations for what has to be officially translated by certified translators and interpreters. So we urge you first to check your school district regulations and state regulations, because by law, our parents have a right to receive official communications from the school, things about assessments and IEPs and student placement into courses and report cards. Those are things that need to be provided with official translations by certified translators. So know that first. And then we want to talk to you about, beyond that, what are some other ways, what are some tools that we can use to cross between languages on a day-to-day basis so that we can really create meaningful, rich conversation with our families daily without waiting for an official interpreter. So we're going to show you a quick video of a parent meeting using Microsoft Translator. This is a commercial for Microsoft Translator, but this is a free program that we encourage you to try out with your families. Also, Google Translator does similar things. So you can see which one you like best, which one works best for you and your families. We just want to give you some ideas of how these can be used with our families.
Click here to view the video and then return back to this presentation.
So now we want to share some tools with you that we've developed to help you do this kind of work and think about how can we communicate across languages with our families. So I'm actually going to go into our Padlet and show you some of these tools. This just shows a little preview of some of them. Okay, so here's the Padlet. And you'll see on the left-hand column, we have some of our communication tools that we've developed. So you can feel free to download these, adapt them, use them however you like. So the first thing you'll see is the parent communication survey. So currently we have this survey in English and Spanish, and we'll be adding 5 other languages in the coming months. So check back, or you know, if you fill out your email address, we'll be able to send you all of our resources this summer once they're finalized. So in the communication survey, it's asking parents their preferences for how they like to communicate, whether they have access to technology at home, how they like different kinds of communication. If they want to have a tutorial showing them how to use the different apps that are needed for communication. So that's an important one, because we found that if different teachers in different classrooms at your school are using different apps, Class Dojo, Google Classroom, Seesaw, then parents are having to relearn new apps every year. And there's not always a system for helping parents understand, how do I download this? How do I use this? How do I communicate through this app? How do I use the translation features in this app? Because most of them have really good translation features now. But we don't want to leave that up to parents to figure out. So helping to provide those video tutorials, finding the video tutorials online and providing them in multiple languages is really important. Okay, so then the next communication tool, there's the Spanish version. And then we have translation and interpretation resources. So we've put together for you a list of different translation tools, and we'll show you a couple of these in a minute. Google Translate is the one I recommend the most and use all of the time in my own teaching and with student teachers at UC Davis. And then there's a bunch of other translating tools on here as well, with a little bit of brief information about them and some ideas on how you might want to use these as a resource. So thinking about how you're going to communicate with parents, how are you going to translate newsletters to send home, how are you going to have that quick conversation after school with parents in multiple languages, all different kinds of things. How are you going to have, you know, a parent conference in multiple languages, especially if there are languages that you can't get an official interpreter for from your school, then we have ways of doing that. Okay, so now I'm going to bring us back to our presentation. All right, so this is a picture of Google Translate. So we're going to show you how to use Flipgrid and Google Translate simultaneously in a way that, you know, to show you how to go across multiple languages and invite families to share their language and knowledge with the class. Okay, so if you're familiar with Flipgrid, let me go back here. It's really easy to create assignments, invitations for communication for families. And you can, when you go to create something for families, you might want to set it for, here we go, set it to guest and create a guest password. So you have to create a password. So something like families or the teacher's last name, or something really easy for families to remember, so that they don't have to have an email address or an account, and they can still use Flipgrid to create videos and comment on their students' videos and share information with the class. So in this one, we're using the book Family Pictures, Cuadros de Familia, and it's written by a Mexican-American artist, Carmen Lomas Garza, and she painted pictures of memories from her childhood, really beautiful pictures, and wrote descriptions of these family memories for each picture. So as a class, we read this book, we talk to students about their own family memories, and have students share orally or in writing their own family memories using all of their languages. So this book is in English and Spanish, so it's a great example of how we can go across languages and invite students in to share their ideas in their own languages. And then we can use this with families too. So if we share this book with families and invite them to use Flipgrid, they can draw or share a photo of a family memory and describe it with their children and really share parts of their identity and their culture. And they can do it in whatever language they want. So the way we can invite families to look at this in multiple languages, we can show families how to click on this book with the speaker right here called the Immersive Reader. And then if you click on this book over here that says Reading Preferences, we can choose a language. So you'll see all the different languages here. And maybe we'll want to put it in, let's see, I have Russian students in my class, so I'll select Russian. And then I'm going to click Document. So it'll actually translate all of the instructions that you just saw on that first page. And for a lot of languages, it'll read them orally too. So for students or families that haven't had opportunities to develop strong literacy in their home language, this is a great tool because it reads it to them.
В классе мы читаем книгу под названием «Cuadros de Familia, Family Pictures». Книга была написана мексиканской.
Okay, so there's the invitation for families to respond. And then I want to show you that you have families that respond using their home languages, and maybe you don't speak all of the languages of your students and their families. So how can you get an idea of what they're saying? So I'm going to show you a response from a parent in Arabic and how you might use Google Translate to get an idea of what they're communicating so you can communicate back. And it's not perfect. It does better with written text than oral text, but you'll be able, as a teacher, you'll be able to get a pretty good idea enough to be able to respond back to the family and create some really meaningful communication that way. So I'm going to share two screens really quick here. Okay, so I have on the left side, I have the Flipgrid video in Arabic from the parent, and on the right side, I have Google Translate. And when I'm translating audio, I like to click on the actual Google Translate link instead of just using the small window that comes up, because then it'll keep translating for longer and it won't keep stopping in the middle of the thing I'm trying to translate. So I've selected Arabic as the language of input and then English for the output. So I'm gonna then click this microphone and then play the video and we'll see what we get.
أنا أم رمزي، حبيت أقول لك إحنا في رمضان وبنصوم كل يوم. كنت عايزة أسألك ممكن أجي على الفصل أتعلم الأولاد على رمضان وأجيب معايا بلح عشان يجربوا البلح؟ شكرا.
Okay, so I didn't do the whole thing, but we get, I'm Ramsey's mother. I would like to tell you that we're in Ramadan every day. It's possible for the children to learn about Ramadan, and I will answer dates with me because of the closest dates. So if we were to keep going, we would see that this parent is volunteering to help the class learn more about Ramadan. And so we can see we have enough information from Google Translate to be able to respond back and invite this parent in and to share information across languages. Okay, so let's get back to our presentation. Okay, so before we jump into relationships, I want to invite my colleagues, Suzanne and Soha, if you have anything else you'd like to add about communication, anything important that maybe I missed.
I just think the tools that you showed are so powerful. The use of Flipgrid and Google Translate. I mean, the possibilities really are endless, and you can do so much and really engage parents using these tools. So I'm really excited that you shared those with the group, and I hope that the group gets to try some of these out in their own classrooms.
Great, thanks. And now on to relationships.
You're on mute.
Thank you. I was saying the more we use them, the better, the more comfortable we'll be, and the better it'll become when we're using these practices. So I am going to share my screen right now and go on to relationships. So when we're talking about relationship building, I'm really going to build on a lot of what Leslie was talking about, because really when we're talking about communication, that's the first step in the process, or one of the steps in the process, because our ultimate goal is we want to build relationships with parents through that communication, and then also leading into advocacy, which is what Suzanne's going to talk to us about in a little bit. So let's start first with what the research says as far as relationships. Teachers and administrators should have knowledge of the families they serve, including values of their languages, backgrounds, and cultural traditions. So one of the things we really emphasize is getting to know your parents on a deeper level, not just phone numbers and how to contact them, but what are their traditions? What do they enjoy doing? How can we go a little bit deeper and invite them to share and celebrate their cultures with us? Also, focusing on translanguaging, it can be useful to practice and accommodate the needs of diverse populations. So once again, when we talk about translanguaging, we're bringing those home languages in to build those relationships, to tell our parents that we value your beliefs and your language and your culture. And when building relationships with families, it's important to be familiar with their cultural traditions. So we want to make sure that we are sensitive to the fact, for example, what Leslie was just talking about. If it's the month of Ramadan and there are kids in your class that are fasting, making sure that we don't bring in treats for kids maybe at that time of the month, so that we can honor the people who are fasting and not put them in an uncomfortable situation. So those are things that are just helpful to keep in mind when we're talking about building relationships within families. And so school relationships require establishing those connections to build that mutual trust and support between bilingual students, educators, and families. Because we also know that a lot of times bilingual parents sometimes are a little hesitant to come and reach out. They might not know the norms of what the school expectations are. A lot of times they might feel that it's disrespectful to question a teacher when it's not really questioning the teacher, it's just asking for clarification. They might think they're being rude by doing that. And really, we want to make sure that we're inviting parents into the classroom and being able to communicate with us and feeling comfortable about that process. So that's really what we're talking about when we say building relationships. So I want to take some time to share with you some of the tools that we've created when we talk about building relationships with families. I'm going to come on over to these documents. And again, these are on the Padlet as well. So the first one is engaging with families on social media. So especially right now when we have the time of COVID, a lot of times we know that parents like to come in and talk and have that one-on-one face-to-face communication. But when it's not possible, social media is another outlet that we can really turn to stay in touch with our families. And once we start to get into the routine and be very active in social media as a school or as a teacher, hopefully that's going to help build extra bridges along the way. And so we developed a social media guide, a beginner's guide for educators. We talked about choosing the right platform that would work for you and your families, coming up with a plan, and creating your content. Is your content to educate? Are you going to create tutorials for your families? Do you want to build awareness about certain topics that are happening? Is it entertaining? And really, it could be all of these. What's going on in your classrooms? Sharing pictures, inviting your families to share pictures. Maybe they've done something like that in their own homes and they want to share their ideas with you, so they can also respond in this way. And it's not just a one-way communication. and eliciting feedback. So maybe you have a question, you want an opinion from your families, and you want to hear what their feedback is. You could take a poll or ask a question directly on social media for that. And then also inspiration. We know that things can get draining and sometimes people can get discouraged, and that inspirational quote or that thought could really help your families go into the positives of what they're experiencing at that point in time. And so that is just our guide to social media. The next thing that I wanted to show you to go hand in hand with that is we created social media posts for family engagement, and we covered it for every week of the year. So really we're trying to take some work away from you, make your life easier, and give you some ideas on what you could do to post. And so the way that this is set up is we set it up where there's 4 weeks every month. We put in week 1, healthy habits, things to do at home, just some healthy reminders. Week 2, school tips, ways that parents can be involved, maybe giving out phone numbers if they need to contact you, where to go if they need extra help and support in school. And then we have week 3, which is resources, online books that are offered in various languages that they can use to read books in their home language or to learn a new language with their student. Maybe there's a student in the class that speaks Farsi and your child is interested in that. So you just open it up and compare Farsi to English or to your home language and make those comparisons. So again, always trying to keep that translanguaging component and honoring that home language. And then week 4, we have seasonal craft or family adventures. So ideas to get families moving and doing things together. And again, always emphasizing sharing what they've done together and using their home language whenever possible. And you'll notice that when I move to the other pages that we also put corresponding pictures to go along with it, because we know that visuals are always helpful in getting people involved and taking a look at that post. And the more that we can get parents to actively be involved in these, it hopefully will give them some ideas of things they can do with their families. And again, bringing in that translation and translanguaging component. If your parents do not speak that language, thinking about how are we going to convey these posts in multiple languages. Maybe there's 3 major languages that are spoken in your school. Can you get those posts to be put in each of those languages so that we're honoring and including all of our families there? The next thing that I wanted to share out with you, when we're thinking about putting this all together, it's also another tool, but it's what I want you to think about when we're talking about application. We created a survey that's a family culture and values survey. And within that survey, we really took the time to think about what are the cultural and value systems of our families that we want to know about them. What are their norms? What do they do in their free time? Again, just digging in really deeper to understand that core value. And so thinking outside of the box, when we are giving surveys to our families at the beginning of the year, first of all, we know they're getting a lot of documentation. Lots of papers are going out. They can feel very bombarded. And we want to make this a really personal time, a personal event for them, because we want them to feel counted. And if we can bring them in to feel like we really care, then that's already breaking a barrier with our parents. So one of the things that I want you to keep in mind with these surveys, think about how would you apply translanguaging into these surveys. And so one of the things that we talked about, and you can pause for just a moment so you can think about for yourself what you think you would do. And then I want you to take a look at some of the things that we've talked about as a team. We talked about possibly putting those survey questions onto the Flipgrid that Leslie had talked about earlier. And so your parents could then respond to those questions on Flipgrid, and you can use Google Translator to understand those questions. But then you're seeing those parents face to face, you're hearing how they're interacting, you're able to really get a feel of what their passions are. Even if you're not understanding their language directly, we can use that translation tool to build that bridge. So we can do it through Google Translate and Microsoft Translate, and do an interview. If we wanted to do a live face-to-face interview, we could do that as well. So whether it's a recording because it's the time of COVID, or whether it's face-to-face once COVID is over, really using those translanguaging tools and those translation tools to make this a more personable event. And again, this is so early on in the year that we're building that trust with those families so that they feel comfortable to come in and talk to us if they need to. And so with that, we're going to build on to our next topic, and Suzanne's going to talk to you about advocacy.
Thanks, Soha. Before we move to advocacy, I just wanted to share really quick the survey that Soha just talked to you guys about. That is also available in Spanish, and that is on the Padlet in both English and Spanish and more languages. It'll be translated into more languages, so that is coming as well. So I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. And there is one other tool in that column under relationships, and it's called Letter to the Principal. And we put that in there in case you wanted to take a look at that. That's really an opportunity to invite you and your colleagues to look at a sample letter that was sent in to a principal from a bilingual parent, and it brings to light some of the things that Soha was talking about in terms of cultural values, expectations, a parent not really being sure how to approach or when to approach the teacher. So we put that in there as kind of a way for you to either individually reflect on the relationship that's happening in that example, or to invite your colleagues to participate in that as well. So I wanted to make sure that you guys knew about those additional resources.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think I'm going to share, well, I'll leave this up and then I'll share the tools for advocacy. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about advocacy. And, when we think about advocacy, I want you to really think about how schools and districts can really partner with families in more meaningful ways. So it's really, when we talk about more meaningful ways, I'm talking about ways that really go beyond traditional roles. Oh, we're having a bake sale, bake something from your culture and bring it in. We're talking about things beyond that. Of course, those are things that you can do, continue to do, but we really want to think about ways, more meaningful ways that go beyond those traditional roles, giving families more opportunities to really be true advocates. And so when we talk about family advocacy is a process of engaging bilingual families as key decision makers in really shaping activities and programs that promote student learning. So it's really important to empower families to become active participants in that planning process of school decisions. So not really like, okay, we've already made these decisions, here's the data, we're just gonna show that to the parents, and that's the involvement, to really go beyond that. So thinking about their ideas, and implementing their ideas and valuing and welcoming their ideas as part of your decision making. And so as educators, we really need to consider the kinds of decisions that families can make and how teachers and schools can really elicit and incorporate their input. So we want to think about how we can include families in our school's decision-making structures. So thinking about the school community councils or those committees that we have, where we can have parents as the majority of the membership, operating by bylaws, agendas, minutes, including parents on other appropriate school teams as well, to really seek their input in decisions that are made by school teams, planning for school improvement. We also want to offer training and support for parent leaders. And that's something we need to think about how we can include that in the school budget, where there really needs to be a line item for family engagement with a portion of that really allocated to training and supporting of parent leaders. and thinking about providing professional development for teachers on family engagement and how to work with parent leaders. Now, we know there's some barriers, right, to participation. So a lot of families, some of our bilingual families might feel maybe marginalized by the school system. They might be intimidated by academics in English. They might be unaware of expectations from the school. And so we have to keep that in mind, that these feelings of exclusion can really act as barriers to participation, and it can lead to some bilingual families to disengage from the school. So we want to keep those barriers in mind to improve participation. So we really want to be explicit about how families can engage. We want to help families find support through social networks that might help them navigate the school system. And we really want to facilitate interactions that act as that bridge between the home and the school. And so I have some tools to share with you. And actually, if we have time, we'll do I wanted to share with you a quick video from Colorado, Colorado too, that really talks about and highlights a parent as a leader. But first, let me show you some of the tools that we have around advocacy. So I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. So on the Padlet, you'll see under advocacy, we have a couple tools in here for you. The first one is discussion protocols. And so you can use these discussion protocols kind of as a guide for you when you're facilitating meetings or collaborations with families and community members. And so there's purposes of protocols here, and there's specific kind of directions on how you might want to form ground rules. What's the purpose? How do you prepare for it? What's the process? So you can use these protocols to really help structure the conversation that you're having when you are inviting families in as advocates. So that is in here. We invite you to take a look at that. The other one that I think is important to share with you all is the involvement and engagement continuum. So I think when we talk with a lot of teachers, our parent involvement is kind of over here, right? You know, family involvement is more school centered. It includes promoting ideas to parents about problems and solutions, where we really want to kind of move towards this part of the continuum, really having them engaged as advocates. So it's more parent centered, and it's, we're getting parents to come up with solutions and really making them a part of our school decisions. So we invite you to think about and to reflect on, where do you think you are or your school is on this continuum, and how can we move more towards engagement. Another tool on here that I wanted to share with you is the mentoring guide. And so we have some examples in this document here to as a starting point to really how to structure your program, important things to keep in mind when we have parents mentoring other parents to become advocates in the school, advocates for their child. And so, there's different ways that we can do this, not just having, not just having parents, as part of these key decision makers at school in these meetings, but even thinking about how we can have parents as true advocates for their child's learning. So what are the things that they can do at home as well to really make them feel empowered and a part of their child's success? So other things to think about as well. In this tool, we have how can the process be structured, some ideas here, and what must I think about before beginning? This is important as well. And then this piece here, establishing trust and building rapport. And so, some ideas about really getting families to become advocates, key decision makers in school, and some of the additional roles that parents can take on as well. So we invite you to take a look at that guide. Now, I wanted to share with you a quick example. We're talking about parents as leaders, and not just our English speaking parents, but our parents who speak other languages as well. And I wanted to show you an example from Colorado of that, where we have, and it is in Spanish, but there's some subtitles as well. So we'll take a minute. It's just about a minute long. I'll share this with you all.
Click here to view the video and then return back to this presentation.
An example of how we have a bilingual parent really becoming a leader and a partner in engaging other bilingual families. And if you're not familiar with Coloring Colorado, I'm assuming you probably are, but there's a lot of resources on there for advocacy as well that I think are really helpful. Anything else around advocacy? Do my partners want to share before we move on? I wanted to make sure that I've covered that, everything I need to cover there. Looks like we've talked more about the tools, and then we're going to be adding more as well. So keep an eye out for our updated email. All right, we invite you to think about all that we have talked about today, what you've learned today, and we invite you to make a plan. So what can you do to improve communication, advocacy, and relationships with bilingual families? And how is this going to directly connect to student learning? So we invite you to take a look at the tools. We invite you to think a little deeply about all of these pieces today and think about what you can do to improve on all of these components. We also want to thank you for your time today and for your attention. We want to share the Google form. The link is on the Padlet and it's also below. So you can either access it right from here or you can go to the Padlet and there's a separate section for the Google form as well. If you fill that out with your name and your email, we'll make sure that as our tool suite is finalized, we'll make sure to share that with you. So make sure that you provide your information if you would like updates on our tool suite. And also there is a section on that Google form. If you have any questions or comments as well, please feel free to add them there.
And Suzanne, would you mind going back to the Padlet for a second?
Absolutely. Here you go.
Thanks. So I wanted also to highlight the family resources and materials in here. We have some things that are translated into 5 different languages that you could share with parents. Bookmarks for engaging around literacy, family conversations, all kinds of resources there for parents, as well as some videos in English and Spanish that teachers could share with parents that are around supporting literacy at home, especially using the home language. So we just wanted to highlight those resources there for you. And I think when we introduced ourselves, we forgot to mention that all of us are former elementary school teachers. We are all bilingual and we are all parents. So we hope that you find this suite of tools and the framework useful. And we also are continuing to adapt and develop them. So in the Google form, if you have ideas or suggestions to improve them or other tools and resources that you would like to see, especially if you're a teacher, if you're a school leader, or if you're a parent yourself, please, we're here to help and support. So feel free to let us know what more you would like to see. Anything else?
Thank you, Leslie. That was a really important column, so I'm glad you said something.
All right, well, thank you all so much for sharing this time with us. We hope that this was helpful. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.